Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Austin. This is Gone in 60, and this is my 2022 Subaru WRX. Now, I had an interesting comment pop up the other day, and it honestly made me think I need to make a video on this because I have driven the VA chassis WRX, I've driven the VB chassis WRX, so I want to share with you guys the differences in driving and how these cars feel like, some minor differences. I know I've covered everything that's changed from the VA to the VB chassis in a previous video. However, I just want to cover some of the things that are a little bit different that you guys should be aware about. So let's jump into a similarity before we talk about some of the differences. So one of the similarities that you guys are going to feel, and this is actually a huge compliment to Subaru, is they both feel extremely mechanical. They're amazing. That it's one of the things that draws you to a WRX is just the mechanical feel being connected to the car. So as far as the shifters are concerned, from the VA to the VB, they feel exactly the same. Some of you like that, some of you hate that. I actually have loved the shifter in my VB, but from a VA to a VB, I didn't notice any difference in terms of just shifter feel or anything, and I actually think that's a good thing. Some of the differences that you guys are going to notice upon driving these cars is the VB chassis, and I've shared rigidity strength in other videos and how much they strengthen everything up, but the VB chassis is going to feel stiffer to you. It's going to ride stiffer and it's going to be stiffer. But that's a good thing, and that's a sports car, sports sedan that you're buying. So the VB chassis is going to feel stiffer than the VA chassis. Some other things to note, the VA chassis is much more heavily boosted than the VB chassis. I think the VA chassis can go up to 18 to up to 20 maybe peak pounds of PSI, where the most I ever had my VB was around 14, but I think on average you're going to see right around 12. So it's a less stressed engine. You obviously have 0.4 cylinders more of displacement. You have the 2.0 in the VA chassis, and you have the 2.4 liter in the VB. So in terms of kind of drivability and what they're like, there's a few things that you should know. If you're planning to keep both of these cars stock and you're going to go 0 to 60, the VA chassis is going to be faster than the VB. It just is. And it's going to be faster because you only have to shift once to get to 60. So in second gear, you can hit 60 mile an hour. In the VA chassis and the VB chassis, you're going to have to shift 3 times. Now, if you're extremely good, if you're extremely fast, you might be able to achieve the exact same times or very close to it. But I do believe that based on when I drove it, when I did some acceleration tests, I was a little bit faster in the VA than I was in the VB, just because I didn't have to shift. Every time you have to shift, that's why autos are so much faster than manuals. But you're gonna find that the VA is a little bit quicker to 60 than the VB. Now, the VB, the torque comes on a lot quicker, it's more instant. But another thing you have to consider too is the red line on these cars. The VB is going to be around $6,000, and the VA is going to be closer to 65, 6,800 before you hit the rev limiter. So you can wind out the VA chassis a little bit more. The VB chassis, in my opinion, is tuned so much better. It's so much more linear. The VA at times it's going to feel like the car. It kind of reminds me, it's funny, is like old JDM cars. When the turbo kicks on, like you feel it, punches you in the face, but it takes a minute to get there. The VA chassis is a great platform. I prefer the looks of the VA chassis over the VB. However, I think the VB can be modified and look amazing. But when you're just purely talking about kind of performance, straight line performance, the boost, the drivability, the VA chassis, and I've said this in STIs I've driven, I've said this just basically on standard WRXs I've driven, I always struggled with how those cars are tuned, because you would reach kind of flat spots and then boom, turbo kicks on, and then boom, kind of falls on its face. The VB chassis, because of a little bit more displacement, I think you can get more power from the car without having to use the turbo. So the cars are probably going to feel very similar. When you're looking at a spec sheet, you're talking like 3 horsepower and 3 pound-feet of torque. It's not much. So it's very similar. However, what Subaru I think did with the VB chassis is gave it more displacement, made the car feel less stressed, with the ability to tune it and to get a lot more out of it. So in terms of like just power and driving it, that's what you're gonna notice. You're gonna get to 60 faster. The VB is tuned better, but the VB, the one thing, and tunes fix this, is when that red line comes up really quick at 6,000 RPM. So just be prepared for that. A couple other changes you're going to notice is the tech, especially if you get above the base trim level. You know, as I drove STIs, I drove WRXs in the V8 chassis, the tech is very limited in those cars, and that's also what makes the car great. But as you get into like some of the infotainment, it's pretty legacy, it's pretty almost archaic in a lot of ways, and that's one of the things that you're going to notice when you jump to the VB chassis. Now, admittedly, when I was looking into VBs, I didn't like the look of the whole tablet. I thought it looked dumb, I thought it looked silly and out of place until I actually sat in one and used one. You know, some people complain about the lagginess, and almost any car made today, I hear people complain about infotainment. It's laggy, it doesn't work great. I had very few issues, like very minimal, if not any, with my VB in terms of the screen. And so just a lot of the tech that you're going to be able, you know, to get, you know, as you move into certain trim levels of Apple CarPlay, just some different things, it's just worth it. And I think if the tablet turns you off, go play with one, go see one. But in far as like everything else, like interior wise of the car, analog gauges, you know, they moved the boost gauge from the center console area in the VA to the VB, they moved it up where the tack is, and so you get a lot of the same things, which I think make it really, really cool. So in the center gauge cluster of the VB, you can have your boost show. You still have analog gauges, seat fill, kind of quality of the interior. I do feel, a lot of people are going to say it's cheap, and sure, you could argue that, but I do feel that Subaru has slowly upped their game and making the car feel a touch more luxurious. And I use that term loosely because I don't consider Subaru and luxurious is synonymous. I think Subaru's got a long way to go, but you'll notice some different trim pieces and things that they did to try to make it stand out a little bit more, try to make it look a little bit nicer. Now, one thing I will say in terms of like just overall stock exhaust and startup, you're going to notice that the VB chassis, in my opinion, sounds significantly louder than prior generations WRXs. Now, you know, obviously with the STIs, you have the EJ Rumble. You know, with the VAs, they sound really good too. The VB, especially on cold startup, is quite a bit louder in stock form, in my opinion, as I've driven both of the cars. I think one thing I noticed, especially with the VB chassis being stock, I did feel like I got a little bit more turbo noise just from stock to stock, from V8 to VB, which I think is always welcome and always awesome. Obviously, intakes, blow-off valves, a lot of things can fix that. But the main thing that you're going to notice with these two cars is there's a lot of similarities. They made it a little bit stiffer. They made it about exactly the same in terms of quickness. But if you're into tuning it, I think that's where you're really going to see things take off. Obviously, with the STI, you have the more robust STI transmission. The WRX, it's both models are going to fall plague to how much power you can get out of the stock transmission. So I think you're going to enjoy both cars. I do like the looks of the V8 chassis more than the VB. I totally get that. But if you're really into tuning these cars, I do think that the VB chassis has more potential over just the VA WRX chassis in terms of getting horsepower, torque with minimal modifications, because you're starting with less boost. You can turn that up a few upgrades and you're going to be pushing a lot more power. So guys, those are just some quick differences. I love that comment that I got. I appreciate comments like that, and I'm totally willing to make videos based on comments that I get. But I thought it was a good topic of what are some quick things that I noticed from driving the VA chassis to the VB. What's different, what's similar. I hope you guys liked today's video. If you guys did, please like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch you on the next video.
We hustle.